mean I'll see it.
I used to think my memory was one of the few things I could actually trust about myself. You know how it is. You look back at your childhood and see those mental Polaroids of birthday parties or that time you fell off your bike, and you just assume they're solid. But I found out recently that your brain is basically a liar. It's a storyteller that doesn't care about the truth. It just wants a narrative that fits. And sometimes, if someone nudges that narrative just a little bit, you can end up remembering things that never happened. Or worse, you remember something so clearly that you wish to God it was just a lie. My mom started it during a dinner about a year ago. We were just sitting there, picking at some takeout, when she mentioned the time I got lost at the mall when I was 5. I told her I didn't remember that, but she went into full detail. She talked about how I wandered off near the fountain, how she panicked for 20 minutes, and how a kind, elderly man in a tan jacket found me crying by the toy store and brought me to security. At first, I laughed it off. I told her she was probably thinking of my cousin. But then, over the next few weeks, I started seeing him. Not in person, but in my head. I started remembering the texture of that tan jacket. It was that rough, canvas material that feels like sandpaper if you rub it the wrong way. I remembered the mall's floor, those giant, cold white tiles that seem to stretch out like an ocean when you're only 3 feet tall. I remembered the smell of the place, that weird mix of floor wax, cinnamon pretzels, and the stale, recycled air of the department stores. By the second month, the memory was vivid. I could see the man's face. He had deep, sagging lines around his mouth and eyes that looked like they were bruised, a dark, sunken purple. He had smiled at me, and I remembered his teeth being slightly too yellow, like old piano keys. I told my mom about it, and she just nodded, saying she was glad I finally remembered being safe. But then the memory started to change. It didn't stop where she said it did. A few nights ago, I was lying in bed, and the memory expanded. It was like a film strip that had been stuck and suddenly started rolling again. In this new version, the man didn't take me to security. He took me to the parking garage. I remember the air getting colder as we walked through those heavy, weighted double doors. The sound of our footsteps changed from the squeak of sneakers on tile to the dull, hollow echo of concrete. I remember him holding my hand. His grip wasn't kind. It was tight. His skin felt like old parchment, dry and thin, and I could feel the hard ridges of his knuckles pressing into my palm. I remembered looking up at him, and he wasn't looking for a security guard. He was looking at the rows of cars with a focused, hungry intensity. He led me to a rusted-out sedan, the kind of car that looks like it's held together by grime and prayer. Inside that car, the smell was different. It wasn't cinnamon anymore. It was a thick, cloying stench. It reminded me of a basement that had flooded and stayed wet for years, earthy, damp, and sour. There was something else underneath it, something sharp and metallic that made the back of my throat itch. It didn't smell like pennies or copper. It smelled like a butcher shop trash can left out in the sun. It was the scent of something organic that had been opened up and forgotten. I remember sitting in the passenger seat, my legs dangling off the edge of the cracked vinyl. He didn't start the car. He just sat there in the driver's seat, staring straight ahead through the windshield. Then he reached into the back seat and pulled out a small wooden box. He placed it on his lap and opened it. In my memory, the one that's supposed to be a fake suggestion, the box was filled with hair. Different colors, different lengths. Some were tied with little pink ribbons, others were just matted clumps. And tucked into the corner of the box was a pair of small, silver earrings. They looked exactly like the ones my mom told me I lost that same year. The man turned to me, and his smile didn't reach his eyes. His eyes stayed flat, like 2 black glass beads. He reached out with a pair of rusted sewing scissors and snipped a lock of my hair. I remember the cold metal against my scalp, the sudden snip that felt like it vibrated through my skull. He didn't hurt me, not then. He just tucked the hair into the box, patted my cheek with a hand that felt like a dead weight, and told me I was a good investment. Then, he simply walked me back to the mall entrance, pointed toward the fountain, and vanished. I woke up from that memory drenched in sweat, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard it felt like it was trying to break out of my chest. I tried to tell myself it was just my brain playing tricks. I'd read about that study, the one where researchers can plant memories in people's heads. I told myself my mom's story combined with some horror movie I'd seen as a kid to create this nightmare. But I couldn't shake the feeling of those scissors. I couldn't shake the smell of that car. I called my mom the next morning. I asked her again about the man who found me. I asked her if she ever actually saw him. She paused on the other end of the line, and I heard the sound of her shifting the phone. She told me she didn't see him clearly. She only saw him from a distance as he walked me toward the security desk. She said she remembered a tan jacket and a hat, but that was it. She'd been so relieved to have me back that she didn't even think to get his name or thank him properly. That's when I started digging through old boxes in the attic. I needed to find something to prove it was a lie. I found an old scrapbook from that year. There were photos of me at the mall, sitting on a plastic train, eating an ice cream cone. I looked happy. Normal. Then I found a photo my dad had taken of me and my mom by the big fountain. It was a candid shot, a bit blurry. My mom is looking at the camera, laughing. I'm in the background, walking away from her, my hand held out as if I'm reaching for someone. I grabbed a magnifying glass and looked at the very edge of the frame. There's a sliver of a person there. Just an arm and a shoulder. The sleeve is made of a rough, tan, canvas-like material. And in the very corner of the shot, you can see a hand reaching down for mine. The skin on that hand is grayish, thin as paper, and the knuckles are pushed up into hard, bony ridges. But that wasn't the worst part. I looked at my own head in the photo. My hair was long, falling down past my shoulders in messy curls. But there, right above my left ear, was a jagged, straight-edged gap where a large chunk of hair had been cleanly cut away. I looked at the date on the back of the photo. It was taken the day I supposedly got lost. My mom didn't plant a fake memory. She gave me the safe version of a real one because her brain couldn't handle the truth of what she'd seen. She'd convinced herself it was a rescue because the alternative, that she'd watched a monster walk away with her child and did nothing, was too much to bear. I haven't slept since I found that photo. Every time I close my eyes, I'm back in that rusted sedan. I can feel the leaden pressure of his hand on my cheek. I can smell that wet, rotting, metallic air. And I keep thinking about that wooden box. I keep thinking about the hair, the ribbons, and the earrings. I think about why he called me an investment. Yesterday, I was walking to my car after work. It was late, and the parking garage was mostly empty. The lights were flickering, humming with that low, electric buzz that makes your skin crawl. I got to my car and reached for the door handle, but I stopped. Sitting on my windshield, tucked under the wiper blade, was a small, weathered wooden box. I didn't open it. I couldn't. I just stood there, staring at it, while the air around me started to change. The scent of the city, exhaust and rain, was being replaced. Slowly, surely, the air began to fill with that thick, cloying smell of a butcher shop in the sun. I looked in my rearview mirror before I backed out, and for a split second, I saw a flash of tan canvas in the shadows of the concrete pillars. He didn't find me at the mall to save me. He found me to mark me. And now, 20 years later, I think the investment has finally matured.
Next story.
Memory is a funny thing, or at least that is what I used to tell myself when I couldn't remember where I left my keys or the name of a girl I went to high school with. We like to think of our brains as these perfect hard drives, recording every second of our lives in high definition, but that is a lie. Our brains are more like editors, cutting and pasting things to make the story of our lives easier to live with. I never realized how much my own mind had edited out until a few months ago, and now I can't trust a single thought I have. My brother, Leo, came over to my place for some drinks. We were sitting on the porch, watching the sun go down, just talking about the old days. We grew up in a house backed against a dense patch of woods in a town that didn't have much else going for it. We started talking about the treehouse our dad built us. It was a rickety thing, mostly scrap wood and rusted nails, perched about 12 feet up in an ancient oak tree. I started laughing about the time he fell out of it. I told him I could still hear the sound of it, that sickening, wet pop when his forearm hit the root of the tree. I described the way he looked, lying there in the dirt, his arm bent in a way that arms aren't supposed to bend. I told him I remembered the hospital so clearly. I could still recall the way the hallway smelled like burnt coffee and industrial floor wax, a scent that made my stomach turn even now. I talked about how he sobbed when the doctor set the bone, and how I felt so bad for him when they wrapped it in that bright blue fiberglass cast. Leo just sat there. He didn't laugh. He didn't even nod. He just stared at me with this look of total confusion, like I was speaking a language he didn't understand. He told me he didn't know what I was talking about. He said he had never broken a bone in his life. I told him he was full of it, that he probably just blocked it out because it hurt so much, but he kept insisting it never happened. That was when my mom walked in from the kitchen with a tray of sandwiches. She had overheard the last bit of the conversation. She didn't smile. She didn't join in on the memory. She just stopped dead in her tracks and looked at me with a face that had gone completely pale. She told me that it wasn't Leo who fell. She said it was me. I laughed, thinking she was playing along with some weird joke, but she didn't laugh back. She went into the hallway and pulled out one of those dusty, plastic bins full of old photo albums. She flipped through the pages with a kind of frantic energy until she found what she was looking for. She slid the book across the table. There I was. I couldn't have been more than 7. I was sitting on the sofa in our old living room, looking small and pale. My left arm was encased in a thick, vibrant blue cast. Leo was standing behind the couch, grinning and making bunny ears behind my head. He looked perfectly fine. His arms were thin and tan and unbroken. I felt a sudden wave of vertigo. It was like the floor had turned into water. I stared at that photo for a long time, trying to force the image to make sense with the movie playing in my head. In my mind, I was standing on the ground, looking down at Leo. But the photo told me I was the one on the ground. I had spent 15 years feeling sorry for my brother, feeling a phantom ache in my own heart for his pain, when the pain had been mine all along. My mom reached out and touched my shoulder, but I flinched. She looked like she wanted to say something else, but she hesitated. She finally told me that I had taken the fall really hard. Not just the physical part, but that I had been different for a long time afterward. She said I used to have night terrors where I would scream about someone being in the treehouse with me. That was the spark. That was the moment the door in my basement cracked open just a little bit. I went home that night, but I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the treehouse. I kept thinking about why my brain would do that. Why would it swap the roles? I started digging through more old boxes in my closet, looking for anything from that year. I found an old journal my mom kept. It wasn't a diary, just a notebook where she tracked milestones and doctor visits. I found the entry from that summer. It didn't just say I fell. It said I was pushed. The air in my apartment felt stifling, like the ventilation had just cut off. I kept reading. She wrote that I had told the police a man had been waiting in the treehouse. A man who didn't have a face, just a smooth surface of skin where his eyes and mouth should be. She wrote it off as a childhood hallucination brought on by the trauma and a concussion. But then I saw a note tucked into the back of the ledger. It was a police report summary. A man had been arrested 3 towns over a month later. He was a drifter. When they caught him, he was carrying a bag that contained several Polaroid photos of children sleeping in their beds. One of the photos was of me. I felt a surge of coldness spread through my chest. I went to the bathroom and looked at my arm. There is a faint, jagged scar near the elbow that I had always told people was from a bike accident. I ran my fingers over it. The skin felt different there, dense and thickened. As I pressed down, a memory flashed in my mind. Not a memory of a fall, but a memory of a hand. A hand with fingers that were too long, wrapping around my bicep and squeezing until the bone snapped like a dry twig. It wasn't a quick fall. He had held me over the edge of that wooden platform. He had whispered things to me. Not words, but sounds. Wet, clicking sounds that felt like they were vibrating inside my skull. He had broken my arm while I was still up there, just to hear me scream, and then he had let go. I sat on the floor of my bathroom, the tiles freezing against my legs. I realized then that my mind hadn't just swapped the identities to protect me from the pain. It had built a wall to hide the fact that someone had been watching me. Someone had been in my room. I started thinking about the blue cast again. I remembered how much I hated it. I remembered the itch. It was a deep, burrowing itch that I could never reach. I used to take a coat hanger and slide it down the gap between the fiberglass and my skin, scratching until I bled. I stood up and went to the mirror. I looked at my face, really looked at it. I saw the lines around my eyes and the way I hold my jaw. And then I looked at the corner of the mirror where the shadow of the shower curtain hung. There was a shape there. It was thin, unnervingly tall, and its skin was the color of a drowned corpse. It didn't have a face. It just had that smooth, terrifying blankness. It wasn't moving. It was just standing there, exactly like it must have stood in the corner of my room when I was 7 years old, watching me sleep with my blue cast resting on my chest. I didn't scream. My throat felt like it had been stitched shut. I realized that the itch I felt under the cast all those years ago wasn't just healing skin. I remembered a sensation of something moving. Something small and multi-legged that he had dropped down the collar of the cast before the doctors finished wrapping it. I grabbed a kitchen knife and went back to my arm, staring at that old scar. My heart was slamming against my ribs like a trapped bird. I pressed the tip of the blade into the scar tissue. I needed to know. I needed to see if my mind was still lying to me. I sliced upward, a shallow, stinging cut. The blood didn't smell like copper. It smelled like something sweet and rotting, like fruit left out in the sun for weeks. I peeled back the skin, my vision blurring with tears. There, embedded deep against the bone of my forearm, was a small, calcified object. It wasn't a piece of the cast. It was a tooth. A long, yellow human molar that had been pushed into the marrow while the bone was still soft and broken. The thing in the corner of the bathroom moved. It didn't make a sound, but I felt the air shift. It stepped closer, and I realized why I had projected the memory onto my brother. I wanted him to be the one who was marked. I wanted it to be anyone but me. I looked down at the tooth in my arm, and then I looked at the faceless thing. It reached out a hand, the same hand with the 2 long fingers. It wasn't here to kill me. It had been with me the whole time, hiding in the gaps of my memory, waiting for me to remember the gift it had left inside my body. I can feel the tooth vibrating now. It's a low hum that starts in my bone and travels up to my brain. It's calling to him. And as I sit here typing this, I can hear the clicking sound coming from the hallway. It's not a sound you hear with your ears. It's a sound you hear with your bones. I think the edit is over. The full movie is playing now, and I really, really wish I could go back to the lie.
Next story.
I don't talk about this much because people usually look at me like I'm a monster, or they assume I've completely lost my mind. It's been 3 years since I walked out of that interrogation room, but I still wake up in a cold sweat, reaching for a knife that isn't there, trying to wipe away stains that never existed. They call it a false confession. The lawyers and psychologists use fancy terms like memory implantation or coerced internalized belief, but those words are too clean. They don't capture the way it feels to have your own soul rewritten by a stranger in a cheap suit while you sit under fluorescent lights that hum until your teeth ache. It started on a normal evening, just getting home from work, when the detectives knocked. They were polite enough at first. They just wanted to clear some things up regarding a woman who lived 3 blocks over. I didn't know her, or at least I didn't think I did. But 6 hours into that room, with the heat cranked up and the water bottle they gave me long since empty, things started to shift. They kept showing me photos. Not the nice ones from her social media, but the ones from this scene. They were visceral. The kind of images that stick to the back of your eyelids. She was in her kitchen, and the floor was slick with a dark, thick liquid that looked like spilled molasses under the camera flash. The lead detective, a guy named Miller with pores so large I could see the grease trapped in them, kept leaning in close. His breath was a mix of stale coffee and menthol. He told me that my car had been seen on her street. He told me they found my prints on her back door. He said they knew I was a good guy, and that maybe I just had a break. Maybe I saw something I couldn't handle and my brain just shut it out to protect me. He kept repeating the same phrase over and over. "Help me help you, Leo. Just tell me what happened when you picked up the blade." I told him 100 times I wasn't there. I cried. I begged. But the exhaustion starts to do something to your perception. You stop trusting your own timeline. After 10 hours of being told you're a killer, you start to wonder if you're the most unreliable narrator in your own life. Miller leaned over the table, his face inches from mine, and whispered that the smell in that kitchen must have been overwhelming. He described it not like pennies, but like raw, wet iron, like a butcher shop at the end of a long, hot Saturday. He asked me if I remembered the way the air felt thick and humid in that small space. And then a spark happened. It was like a shutter opening in a dark room. I saw it. I didn't just imagine it, I saw myself standing behind her. I saw the way her hair was pinned up with a plastic clip, and how a few stray strands were sticking to her neck because she was sweating while she cooked. I told Miller about the clip. His eyes lit up, and he pushed a yellow legal pad toward me. My hand was shaking so violently I could barely grip the pen, but I started writing. I described the weight of the kitchen knife in my palm. It felt substantial, a solid piece of cold steel that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. I wrote about the sound the blade made when it snagged on her sweater, a dull, wet-tearing noise. I described the way she looked at me, not with anger, but with this confused, wide-eyed shock as she slumped against the stove. The smell Miller mentioned hit me then, a cloying, metallic stench that seemed to coat the back of my throat. I could almost taste it. I told them about the way the blood didn't just spray, it flowed, pulling in the grout lines of the tile like a miniature, macabre map. I felt a strange, sickening sense of relief as I confessed. It was like a physical pressure was being drained out of my skull. The tension of not knowing was gone, replaced by the horrific certainty that I was a predator. I gave them everything. I told them I threw the knife into the drainage canal behind the park. I told them I wiped my shoes on the grass. I signed every page of that confession with a sense of grim resignation. I was a murderer. I could see the scene so clearly in my mind, the flickering light over the sink, the way the woman's fingers twitched on the linoleum, the specific shade of red that stained my knuckles. It was a memory as vivid as my first kiss or my high school graduation. I spent 4 months in a holding cell waiting for trial. Every night, I replayed the killing. I would sit on my thin cot and feel the phantom resistance of her body against the knife. I grew to hate myself with a ferocity that is hard to describe. I wanted the death penalty. I felt I deserved to have the life choked out of me just like I had done to her. I had accepted my new reality. I was the monster in the shadows. Then, the DNA results came back. The state's lab found a match on the biological material under the victim's fingernails. It wasn't me. It was a man named Elias Thorne, a drifter who had been arrested for a similar assault 2 states over. There was no overlap, no connection. The eyewitness who saw my car had actually seen a different model and color. The fingerprints Miller told me they found, they never existed. They had lied about every single piece of evidence to break me. The DA dropped the charges, and I was released within 48 hours. My lawyer patted me on the back and told me I was a lucky man. But when I walked out of those double doors into the sunlight, I didn't feel lucky. I felt broken. You see, the brain is a terrifyingly flexible thing. The detectives had provided the blueprints, the photos provided the color, and my own stress-induced psychosis built the house. Even though I know, scientifically and legally, that I was 5 miles away sleeping in my own bed when that woman died, I can still feel her blood on my hands. The memory didn't vanish just because a lab technician found a different strand of DNA. It stayed with me, a permanent, parasitic stowaway in my mind. I can't go into kitchens anymore. The sight of a knife block makes my stomach turn into a knot of cold lead. When I close my eyes, I don't see the life I actually lived. I see the life they forced me to invent. I see the woman's plastic hair clip. I see the way the light caught the edge of the blade before it went in. I have nightmares where Elias Thorne and I are the same person, our faces blurring together as we stand over that poor woman. Sometimes I wonder if I did something else, something they didn't catch, and my mind just swapped the victims. That's what the interrogation did to me. It took away my ability to know what is real. I tried to go back to my old job, but I could see the way my coworkers looked at me. They knew I had confessed. In their eyes, I wasn't an innocent man. I was a killer who got off on a technicality. I ended up moving 2 towns over, taking a job working nights at a warehouse where I don't have to talk to anyone. But even in the silence of the stacks, the memory is there. It's a visceral, oily presence that sits in the corner of my vision. The worst part is the smell. Every now and then, for no reason at all, the air will suddenly turn thick with that raw, iron scent. It fills my nostrils, making me gag, making me want to scrub my skin until it bleeds. I'll be standing in the grocery store or pumping gas, and suddenly I'm back in that kitchen, feeling the warmth of a life fading away under my touch. They told me I was free, but they lied about that too. You can't be free when you're haunted by a ghost you created yourself. I am an innocent man who possesses the soul of a murderer. I carry the details of a crime I never committed, and I feel the guilt of a death I didn't cause. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I find myself wishing I had actually done it. At least then, the horror would belong to me. At least then, the memory wouldn't be a lie. But as it stands, I'm just a hollow shell filled with someone else's nightmare, waiting for the day I finally forget the face of a woman I never even met.
Next story. Next story is yours. Take a look at the shadow in the corner of your room. Are you sure it was that shape a minute ago? Subscribe or be the next in line.